Hello, and welcome back to the Next Frontiers of AI podcast, where we explore the real-world strategies and success stories that are shaping the future of enterprise AI. I'm your host, Scott Hebner, Principal Analyst for AI at theCUBE Research. Thanks so much for tuning in. As we have discussed throughout this podcast series, we're now entering the golden age of AI agents, the beginning of a new super cycle of innovation. And while technology innovation is moving at warp speed, the real impact will be in the labor markets, where the very definition of a workforce is being totally reimagined. The nature of work will change forever, and likely in a more profound manner than past transformations. That's why I'm so excited to share hot off the press findings from a new Digital Labor Transformation Index survey sponsored by theCUBE Research, launching this month in September 2025. And the data is striking. More than 70% of leaders believe they will be the last generation to manage a human-only workforce. Yet our maturity score across 13 dimensions is 3.1 out of 5, showing progress, but there's a clear decline in maturity from aspiration to strategy to execution. And this brings me back to one of the principal tenets I applied while at IBM. A strategy without execution is hallucination. So it's clear that there's much work to do. We've paired this research with dozens of conversations with leaders across our ecosystem, from Deloitte to Semaphore.ai to OpenStream and HOAI, just to name a few. The findings are crystal clear. We are entering a moment unlike any before, which will fundamentally reshape labor markets, redefine how value is created, and unlock entirely new models of productivity. Why? We found that digital coworkers are evolving fast, moving beyond automating repetitive tasks or executing predefined workflows into the realm of knowledge work, where they can plan, problem solve, make decisions, and even act autonomously alongside human counterparts. This is truly a profound shift. We also learned that today's leaders differentiate the notion of an agentic AI strategy from a digital labor transformation strategy. Both are required, but not the same. So is that okay? Will that change? Do they have to merge? The index provides a treasure trove of actionable insights to help answer these questions. And this is just one of 5 indices to come in the weeks ahead. So with that, today we're going to start by unpacking the current state of the digital labor transformation market, why it matters, what leaders must do to prepare. Joining me to break it all down is my colleague and fellow principal analyst here at theCUBE Research, Christophe Bertrand. And let me bring him up. Thanks so much for joining me again, Christophe. It was great to have you here.
Thank you for having me. Great conversation topic.
Yeah, it's fascinating because it's becoming more of a business and cultural strategy than I think many think right now, versus just a technology strategy. And I think that makes it even more fascinating.
Yeah, and the other thing is, I do research in a very different area, but related in many ways, because I focus more on resilience infrastructure, data protection, things like that. And of course, I've been looking at the impact of AI on anything around data and backup recovery. And it turns out this is intertwined. It's definitely changing the way architectures will evolve, the way people interact with the solutions, even at the infrastructure level. So overall, I think it's a fundamental conversation to be having right now.
Yeah, I agree. You gotta have a North Star that you're heading for. And, to my surprise with the research data, which was 625 respondents, I think people were further ahead in this thinking than I certainly anticipated. You've been a leader here at theCUBE Research and getting us into the world of surveys and like data-driven research. I think you've done 3 of these, or in the process by the time you're done with 3 of these. And I think it's great because it's adding data to our experiences and our insights. It's going to make things much more interesting around here, isn't it? And for our clients, more importantly.
Right. And just to point out for our audience, if you're not familiar with market research, when you're talking about 625 respondents, you are definitely, in a very, very comfortable zone in terms of the meaning of it statistically. Typically anything around 300 is great. So 600 is even better. So you can pretty much take it to the bank. I think what you have, Scott, is with the index you've devised is really a state of the market, and not just one. You have 13 of them, you said so.
So let me explain. Actually, let me bring up a chart here. So the name of the research is called the Agentic AI Futures Index, and think of it as 5 indices or 5 modules. What we're talking about today is the digital labor transformation module. 625 respondents. When I say 13 dimensions, I mean there were 13 different aspects of the digital labor market we looked at. And what's going to follow in the weeks ahead is an indice around agentic AI maturity, more from a technology perspective. As you know, because we collaborated on it, the Trust and Governance Index, right, which is related to a summit you and I are looking to run later in the year. There's one on reasoning and decision intelligence, and then there's one on causal AI innovation. So each of them are going to have 200 or 625 respondents. In total, there's 61 questions. We surveyed 9 different roles, from executives to practitioners, and those that are actively involved in either business or technical strategy. 13 industries, and it was just held. So it's fresh data, English, through US, the UK, and Canada. So it should give us a lot of really interesting insights.
Yeah, absolutely, and I think the timing of it is critical. I was just on a couple of briefings from AI type of companies, hyperscalers. Everybody's in AI, and there's a lot of AI washing out there. But the truth is, it's very complex, and I think a lot of people are asking themselves, well, what does this all mean for my own job? Whether you're in IT, whether you're just working in any type of industry. So I think it's a very interesting time to see where the leaders are with their implementations and how much is hype versus reality.
Yeah. Well, let's jump into some of the findings, right? We'll give you a sneak peek. Obviously, there's a boatload of this stuff behind the scenes here. But let me bring up what I consider to be the key takeaways. First, let me start on the top right. So the index is from 1 to 5, and it's a set of criteria that we've developed here that basically applies a methodology on where the aggregate market sits in that index. And what we found was 3.1. So it's somewhere in the middle, right? And what I'm going to show you shortly is it's not like all the questions were in the same 3.1 range. So there's different parts or different dimensions, if you will, of this movement that have different levels of maturity. So what do we find? First of all, digital labor is inevitable, right? I mentioned in the intro that, 70% are saying that, they're going to be the last set of leaders to manage a human-only workforce. No doubt that it's inevitable. 2 is HR is emerging as a key and primary co-architect of this strategy. And the chief AI officers that are being put in place, there's a pretty solid, it's a minority, but I think around 40% or so, that believe that their roles are going to evolve into becoming digital HR leaders. So there'll be business, there'll be technology, and there'll be HR all fused together. I found that really interesting. Trust is the defining challenge. You know that, Christophe, right? No trust, no ROI. Trust has multiple dimensions itself, everything from security to compliance and governance and just user trust and all that. And that's becoming a big challenge in this movement. I also found the barriers are multifaceted and multi-organizational. So there's a lot of barriers that are trying to be tackled. And as we'll talk about in a second here, Christophe, the gap between aspiration to strategy to execution is real. So before I move on to that, what are your thoughts on this?
Well, the one thing that gets my attention is the presence of essentially the functional leads, the business folks in this conversation, right? Let's face it, if you're talking about implementing a business process, of course you're going to have business people involved. The question becomes, do they understand what's going on with the implementation? Are there some dimensions that maybe we're missing in a process because you're dealing with a non-technical crowd? At the same time, it's also maybe a guarantee that things will be done correctly because as a business professional in your functional area, you're going to think about multiple dimensions. And you mentioned trust, which is, of course, even maybe more important than anything else. What data, what infrastructure, and what controls are you using to get all of this done? whether you're talking about agents or just leveraging data to make better decisions or automate some processes.
Yeah, that's true. And when you look at the demographics of the survey, there are business users and there are business stakeholders. So it's not just a technology gang. And as you know, we can use crosstabs to take a look at each one of those. In fact, one of the things I found was those that have the most experience in times of years and the most familiarity with agentic AI are the most optimistic about digital labor and its capabilities and all that, which I found interesting, right? Is that the more involved you are, the more of a believer you're becoming. And, we can segment that up obviously across the different roles. And, and one of the things in the survey results that I also found is that there's a big difference between, do users trust this stuff versus do the technology guys and gals trust this stuff? And, there's a lot to be kind of weeded out in all this. Let me bring up what I consider to be the top line. If I had to net out what I think is the bottom line takeaway, if I'm an executive thinking about a strategy, and you can see here the aspiration, the maturity of the aspiration, the rise of digital labor, if you will, is quite mature, 4.1. But when you look at those that are starting to implement, define and implement, and where they are in that process of a strategy, and whether it's departmental, isolated, or enterprise wide, you can see that the maturity drops to 3.1. And then when you look at actual execution, and in particular the barriers, the gaps in the culture, 1.8. So what this is telling me, and I'd be curious to your take on this, is that, and this has happened in many other transformations too, I think, is the aspirations are there, the vision is there, strategies are being put in place, they're finding problems, those problems are real in terms of inhibitors, and there's a lot to do to get this all straightened out. And the other thing that jumped out at me, which perhaps may be the headline here, is that an agentic AI strategy is not the same thing as a digital labor transformation strategy. And I think that's a super key point to emphasize as we kind of unwind all this data in the weeks ahead.
Yeah, I mean, I think when you're looking at these indices, what you're realizing very quickly is, and we'll go through some of the data, and I know that you have a lot more behind this, but the reality for our viewers is that these are all the signs of an early market in general terms. There's probably another index in there that you should throw in at some point in further research, which would be complexity of implementation, which I think is why you're seeing that 1.8, because you have so many tools, so many platforms. If you again listen to vendors, they will say, oh, we have a unified way for you to do this, that, and the other, and then you realize they have 20 different product solutions, platforms, etc., and it becomes very complex. But what's interesting is that the aspiration is high. So there is maybe this realization that AI can be your friend, not necessarily a foe. It can be an enabler. I think there are other reports out there from other firms that have hinted at the fact that there is very little ROI, or it's hard to find ROI. I think that's not necessarily true if you narrow the scope to specific processes, but clearly the execution is, you're walking into a very new world, totally different world. I mean, even ourselves as industry analysts, you can ask the question, should we be doing this job? Won't we be replaced by AI? And the truth is, well, in the end, you still have to think through what it is you want to do. You still have to have some humans driving the boat here to an extent, even if you get some assistance, just like flying a plane. A lot of stuff is automated, but still need a pilot. And frankly, I think we're probably okay for a while. We still have pilots for many years. That's my view anyway. Yeah. So I think the same thing applies here. And as long as you don't see execution in the 4 or 5 range, I think we can rest assured that humans will be in control.
Yeah, by the time that happens, I'll be tuna fishing off the coast of Marco Island down there on the west coast of Florida, hopefully. But I can tell you just from as I interpret the data, is I don't think that people are envisioning the elimination of jobs. I think they truly are looking at this as giving their employees and their workers superpowers. And it's not just, productivity, superpowers. It's thinking, it's reasoning, it's just making better decisions, it's diagnosing root causes. I think I was impressed by, there were multiple questions hitting at what do you mean by digital labor, and what, we're going to get into some of that. So actually, let's unpack some of this and get a little bit deeper into it. Let's start with the aspiration. This is an example of one of the questions related to the concept or the category that I consider to be the aspirational view. The rise of digital labor. And the bottom line here, 71% of leaders say that this generation of business leaders will be the last to manage a human-only workforce. So again, this is one of several questions. But when you look, 41% strongly agree, another 30% agree, and even another 21%, if you add them in there, you're up around 90%. That's a huge, you've done a lot more surveys through your career than I have, Christophe, but when you have 90% that are agreeing, that is pretty significant. And that's why I think the maturity index in terms of aspirational thinking and vision, 4.1, that's pretty well down the road for a really early marketplace.
Yeah, I think that's also, sort of the hype around AI, but the truth is it's happening. Whether there's ROI, whether we like it or not, it's happening. I think there will be probably some mitigation to that speed over time as people realize, well, it's a lot more complex than we all thought originally. But for some processes, I think it's super valid, extremely valuable. Look, I live in the Bay Area, and if you drive from the airport to San Francisco, you're going to see a bunch of billboards, and literally you have companies there telling you, well, your new inside sales force is essentially agentic. Right. You save X amount of money by using our AI, and I think it appeals to the business side of things. Yes, of course, who would want to save money and add to the top line and the bottom line? I would love that. But the truth is, I think you're correct in that it gives or it demultiplies the ability of the individual to do their job. So there is an operational efficiency dimension to it. And in reality, there is so much that needs to happen in a lot of those companies. There's just too much data to begin with. So in many organizations, there's so much to do that augmenting the ability of the existing workforce to do more with less is actually a great thing, because otherwise what happens is the human side that maybe we're not talking about enough here, which is, well, you can't analyze enough, you can't do enough, you can't perform enough. Well, you end up burning people out, you end up with dissatisfaction, you end up with mistakes being made. So as long as we understand this as an addition to your capabilities as an individual, I think that's great. Now, again, the smart individuals, the smart employees will make AI their friends. I see the same thing in some research I've recently conducted around data protection and AI. The expectation is that vendors have to include more AI in their data protection processes to help with automation, to help IT generalists be able to better recover data. So while you're taking a very general approach here, which is very key because that's across the board, in reality, it already is applying into very intricate components of the IT infrastructure and the economy in general terms.
Yeah, 100% right. I agree with everything you said. And, where there's aspiration, people are going to break through, because aspiration, and I can tell you in the data behind the aspiration, there is investment, actually more investment than I thought. And that's where I kind of concluded from a lot of what I saw was that it's being viewed a little bit differently than the agentic AI technology strategy, right? It's a component of it, but it's much broader. Which makes it interesting. So let's turn to strategy for a second. Again, this is probably where the most questions were. So the survey has given some really good insights into the strategic nature of what people are trying to accomplish. And one of the things that jumped out at me is right here, which is this is a movement from software that helps people analyze and automate things, whether it be making graphics, or whether it be automating how you process a customer service call or diagnose an outage in a network, for example, to knowledge work, right? Where it's more than just making predictions and automating tasks. It's to knowledge work, which means make decisions, problem solve, diagnose problems, pursue goals. And you can see with the questions on the right side here, in terms of what they envision in their strategy. Obviously, automating routine and repetitive tasks is still number one at 67%. But when you take 2, 3, and 4, which are all 60 or around 60 or above, or let's say an average around 60%, diagnose and solve problems, assist in making better decisions, pursue goals with minimal guidance. And then there's ultimately 50%, half, envision that these things are going to go off and do autonomous work on behalf of workers. That's a hell of a lot more of a knowledge work-based thought process than what has traditionally been associated with SaaS applications and where the software market has been, which has been about automation. If there's a single word, it's automation and maybe analytics of data, right?
Right, but what's interesting is there seems to be a bit of a decision piece of it, and we'll talk about that because you want to make sure the decision that may be made by a digital coworker, an agent, is actually correct. But look, I was just on a briefing literally less than an hour ago. I'm not going to say who because I'm not here to talk about the specific vendor. But what was interesting is they were showing how their solution can allow you to better migrate data from one environment to another, and with essentially some sort of templatized automation that is AI driven. You can ask like natural language questions. Hey, I'm trying to do this and trying to do that. What would you recommend? And it gives you those sort of like guidelines or guideposts within which you can then maybe customize. Well, that's great because instead of me having to do hours of analysis and this and that and the other, I can go ask the question, okay, I've got the data now, so the analysis intelligently performed is there. Now I can go make a decision, say, oh, by the way, go automate that for me. I'm going to trust that you can go pop up this environment and create all the configurations. Now I'm giving a very specific IT environment, sort of infrastructure-ish example. Same thing could apply to a CRM, customer relationship management or sales related process or marketing process. Or okay, go create a campaign that will pick these leads, so these type of profiles, and do this and do that and send them this type of information. Now that I know these are the people I should be talking to. Give me any industry, any example. As long as I know enough, I can probably give you the same general idea of what it would look like. What does that do for me as the knowledge worker, the IT admin, the HR person, the marketing, the man gen person? Well, it gives me the ability to make better decisions, to be more efficient for the business.
Right.
To come from a place of data, because it's been analyzed for me, and to do a lot more in the amount of time that I have, and also get, which we haven't talked about, all the reporting I need to demonstrate the value that the function, the business that I bring back to the business. So I think this is one of the most important maybe data points you've brought to the table, and the levels of response are really, really high. So I think there is no question that people have these expectations. Now, where I'm going to say and put a big grain of salt in all of this is, yeah, but are we sure that we can trust this data? Can I trust that what you're recommending I do, digital worker agent, is really what I should do? Because I can go talk to, Scott and at the coffee machine and ask for your opinion about this and that, and you will tell me, well, I know enough that, yeah, I think you should be doing that. Or here, this is some agent telling me, I think you should be doing that. Where do we stop or begin with trust here?
Yep. And it's not only you have to get your data right, because that's the bloodline of AI. It's one of the core tenets of the summit we're going to run later in the late fall. But there's also the AI algorithms, right? And the bottom line is today's AI is only as good as you want your future to be, just like your past. And it is not designed to help make decisions. That's just the bottom line. Decisions are based on judgments, right? And judgments are what are used to actually be able to understand and solve problems, right? Knowledge work is about judgments. Generative AI, today's LLMs are about statistical probabilities, correlations, patterns, right? And that's why there's so much hallucination and challenges is, do not make decisions, business critical decisions based on generative AI outputs. Now you get information and you can argue that information can help you make better decisions, but it's not actually helping you, collaborating with you to make a decision that understands the consequences of different decisions. And that's why the final survey I'm doing, or the final index, is on the notion of decision intelligence, reasoning, and causal AI, because if you don't understand cause and effect of alternate decisions, so you're right, the trust issue has a long way to go, and we'll unpack that. The other thing before we move to the next and final, piece of data here is, as we heard this morning from our boss Dave Valente and our colleague George Gilbert, they have this notion of turning software as a service into service as software. And I think that's a technical architecture kind of thought that is this idea of moving from automation, right, of things into the world of knowledge work, where you have these different services to do things better versus, it's all about the service, and the service to knowledge workers needs to be, knowledge workers by definition make judgments. So I think there's a technical thing going on here, and then there's a business thing going on here. And the question is, do they merge?
Yeah, that's the big open question. And for me, there are lots of gaps just in the baseline. Even what you're showing assumes that the data is correct, that the agents are managed, that to your point, the analysis can be trusted, or at least the information provided can be trusted for further decision. And if you offload some of that decision to an agent or some of that automation, then can you trust the result? So there are lots, and security of the whole thing. So I think there are lots of it's early stages, lots of gaps still. But I do like the approach. I like the approach of this notion that it's services we sort of provide to the business with this infrastructure versus consuming essentially what is today very piecemeal from multiple applications, whether they're in the cloud or on-prem or wherever they are, to try to get the job done. Still some way to go on that.
Yeah, but there's a big difference between downloading a software package to do my taxes versus just telling an agent do my taxes, right? And so, but let's deep dive on the gaps. And this is again one of several, actually more than several data points that we have in terms of questions. But I chose this one because if you kind of look at the strategy, it's cross-organizational, right? It is HR working with a chief AI officer being a coordinator. You got the data science teams, you got the technical teams, you got the users, you got the business units. Very clear to me that's what the strategy is about, right? But when it comes to actual implementation, the organizations that are that are part of the implementation stream, only 16% have cross-business teams responsible for digital labor implementation, and is dominated by IT and app dev. And when you get down to a shared model, cross-functional, a center of excellence, or a board, or even CXO, leadership like the CAIO, chief AI officer, or line of business, including HR. I mean, look what happens here, right? It's in the single digits. So, and that's why the maturity score is so low. So we've gone from 4.1 on aspiration to 3.1 on strategy to 1.8 on execution and gaps. And Christophe, as you know, this doesn't even get to the next level, this chart right here, at least, of things like trust, which I asked a lot of questions about. And then there's security, and there's all the other things that we've been talking about for some time here. So there's a lot that's my point in the intro. There's a lot to do here. Right? Strategy without execution is hallucination. And there's a lot of execution gaps and barriers and inhibitors that many don't know about yet, but they're going to come. And there's a lot that people do know about that they're struggling to find answers for. So a lot of innovation still needs to come.
Right. And I think your index clearly shows, first of all, the research clearly shows that the onus is on IT. And to a certain extent, the data science folks, which actually is surprising. I would have expected data science to be, because it was, I think it was pick one, right? In this question, you had to add up to 100%, right? If I'm not mistaken. So it's not like pick all that apply. It's like pick the one who's really in charge of execution, and essentially your the folks you surveyed, your respondents said, well, it's IT. Infrastructure.
They didn't select cross-organizational. They could have selected that.
Right, and your index, of course, is slanted towards collaboration, cross-organization is kind of the way to get to this nirvana of execution, which I think is the right assumption, by the way. So the point is, without revealing too much about the algorithm, that's really where we want things to be. So I think two things. Number one, it shows the market is in early stages. Why? Because right now it's still considered a technical implementation, which of course makes sense. You need the infrastructure, but it's not an infrastructure play. This is actually, you're right, a business investment or a business play. And the fact that it is a business play means that you have to have cross-collaboration or cross-organization collaboration, and it's definitely lacking. So this is where things can head to the wall very quickly, because there's only so much you can ask IT to do for you. Yeah, they're going to give you the compute, they're going to give you the cloud resources, they're going to give you whatever, the networking, hopefully to give you compliance governance at the data level, which also wouldn't actually normally include other functions. The fact that only 20% of data, only 20% said it's data scientists or AI is a bit concerning, because I would have hoped you'd have at least maybe, 30, and then, but no, you don't have that. So I think you're seeing a market or initiative that are in their infancy here. Yes, IT is key. I think we're just building the engine. We're still putting foundations in place, if you want to use a house analogy. We haven't been thinking through all of the components. Some people may have at the strategy level, but we're not there yet. So it looks like we're years and years before where we want to be. If you run this in 2 years and 3 years and you start looking at the evolution, I hope we see the CXO number, which I think you have at 5% looking at the data here. You want to see that in the 25, 30, 40, 50% range. We're not there yet.
Yeah, no leader, no output. And just to circle back real quickly here, and this is one of many of the data points that led me to conclude that an agentic AI strategy is not the same thing as a workforce strategy, and there's different people involved. So when you see a response like we just saw, that it's overly dominated by technical people in IT and app dev, that tells me that it's just very different than the business strategy around your workforce, which is in most organizations over 60% of your revenue, right? Where technical is like 5 or 6 or maybe 10 at most. So this is where the impact's going to be, is bringing this stuff, back to a fusion of technical, business, and workforce. And there was a lot of questions that were asked about HR, which was also very revealing. So before we wrap up here, unfortunately running out of time here, any last thoughts on this and advice for people?
Well, so a couple of things. First of all, I think, I would say, where can I get, if I'm a viewer, where can I get my hands on all of this data? Because this is fascinating. We're just discussing some of the top line levels. You have another 4 indices you've devised across 13 industries. How do I know what's going on in my industry? How do I get in touch to get access to this? And if I'm a vendor, more importantly, where does my solution fit in this model? Because obviously everybody's touting their AI, sometimes AI washed solution. I'm going to be candid here. Not everybody has what it takes. So where do they fit? So I think there's a vendor conversation. There's an end user conversation. How do we gain access to this data?
Yeah, well, thanks for setting that up, because I actually put a chart in here for that, which is, please do contact me, or Christophe, or anyone here at theCUBE Research, if you'd like to explore the data in more detail or get some of the additional insights. There really is a treasure trove. And again, this is the first one out of 5. So we'll be moving on to agentic AI, technology maturity, trust and governance, decision intelligence and reasoning, and then the innovation around causal AI. But either reach out to me on LinkedIn or my email, scott@siliconangle.com, and we can definitely talk about more about what we're finding here with all this data. And a very, very interesting set of things were uncovered, no doubt about it, as you saw, Christophe.
Absolutely. And a lot of my findings that I'll be sharing very soon on data protection and AI really sort of take this maybe to a more down to a more implementation level type of dimension with processes such as compliance, governance, data management, data protection, recovery. But you are going to see very similar trends in expectations and maturity, et cetera. So I think there's Definitely something going on here. We look at it from theCUBE research from multiple angles, from multiple perspectives, and I think we're starting to see a very interesting market shaping up, and lots of challenges for end users, but also, I believe, a lot of opportunity and challenges for the vendors, working with those end users to get things done. With very high level of expectations, aspirations, this is very transformative, and I think the next few years will be very key in establishing some of the best practices that are starting to emerge. And I think I'd love to see how the indices evolve over time. So I hope that maybe next year we have the same conversation and look at how the dials have moved, if they have moved.
Yep. Yeah, no, I think we're swimming in insights and data here. I mean, you mentioned the surveys you're doing. Rob Stretchy has the data platforms research that's underway, and Bob's doing Liberté's doing the AI infrastructure. So kind of pull all this stuff together. You have these different dimensions, as you say, and very, very, very interesting. All right, Christophe, thank you for joining me today. You've not only been a great colleague, but you've also been a real mentor, and I really appreciate everything that you've been doing and your thoughtful insights here and being a part of all this. Your perspectives are great. For our listeners, the key takeaway is this: digital labor is no longer theoretical. It truly is unfolding right now. And the leaders that lean in will gain the resilience, the competitiveness, and a true workforce advantage. If you'd like to survey, as I said before, in more detail and explore with me, just get in touch, and we can definitely have those conversations. And again, you can contact me at Scott Hebner on LinkedIn or scott@siliconangle.com. And don't forget to subscribe to the Next Frontiers of AI podcast so that you won't miss future episodes, where we'll continue to bring the latest insights and strategies shaping the future of enterprise AI. Until next time, I'm Scott Hebner. Thanks again for being a part of the podcast. We'll see you soon. Bye for now.